All right, this is Pentecost, and I am the Pentecost messenger. So I'm wearing today a stole that was Jeff's, and it's Pentecosty, and so I appreciate the ability to be here with that.
Stolen stole?
A stolen stole, you might call it. Yes, you might call it. And I'm glad to be here. Because for one thing, it was kind of challenging to get here. We took out on the road, and I was going to pick up Madeline and bring her. And as I approached her driveway, it began to hail on me. And so I thought, well, I don't like that. And then it hailed more and more and more. And finally, she ran out in the hail and got in the car. And we drove off, and we were on the highway for a while, and then we had to get off the highway, and that seemed worse, so we got back on the highway. Anyway, we're here. Anybody else have an exciting story about getting here?
It held all the way up I-35 for me. Sheets of rain.
Yeah, a lot of rain. So I think we've had enough.
More Thursday and Friday.
Wow.
As we sang that song in May.
Don't you blaspheme me.
All y'all praying for rain, you might hold off on that for a while. I want to touch base with the Pentecost, the Pentecost scripture, which is hopefully in the PowerPoint. Yes?
Yes.
All right. So let's take a look at this. It's probably more than familiar. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem, and at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, I'm dropping it, are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? In our own languages we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power. All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, what does this mean? But others sneered and said, they're filled with new wine. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them, men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they will prophesy. May the Lord add understanding to our hearts and minds as we share these words today. So, did that sound familiar? Have you all heard that one? I mean, if you've ever been at church on Pentecost, there's a pretty good chance that you have heard it. Communication is a big issue about this story, and it's a big issue about our everyday living. Raylene and I, we live in the same house, but we oftentimes try and speak to each other from the opposite ends of the house. And somebody said that's what marriage is. It's shouting at each other from different ends of the house. As a result of that, we usually don't really hear 100% of what's said. And oftentimes I'll say, Raylene, I heard you say one word and it was thus and such, and I missed all the rest. And then hopefully she'll fill me in. Come a little closer and fill me in. She's not the only one that does that. I do it too. Fortunately, the pets hear better than we do, but they don't seem to pay much attention either. A couple of old familiar stories about communication I want to share with you. The first one is there's a Christian minister, and he's one of those who's involved in ecumenical activities. Very good. give him high marks on that. He became acquainted with some Lutheran pastors, and he invited them to a church service, a special church service. 3 of them came, but the church was already full. And so he noticed them standing out there sheepishly. They're sheepish again. I can't get away from that word. Looking for a chair. He wanted to show him some good hospitality, so he whispered to one of the greeters, he says, "Get 3 chairs for our Lutheran pastor friends." Well, the greeter didn't really hear what he said, so he said it again a little bit louder, pointing at the back of the church. 3 chairs for the Lutherans. So dutifully, the greeter stands up in front of everybody and he says, 3 cheers for the Lutherans. End of story. But that's communication. Anybody been there? Been there, done that. It's part of the human experience. And then there was the elderly couple. They're having their golden anniversary party, and the husband is so moved by what he has experienced, his love for his wife, and he says before everyone, he says, "My dear wife, after 50 years I've found you tried and true." And his wife looks at him, cocks her head to one side and says, "Eh?" And he says, "After 50 years I've found you tried and true." And she says, "Well, let me tell you something. After 50 years I'm tired of you too." Communication. So important. And communication is the issue in the Pentecost story, the communication of certain truths to people that are very different culturally and in other ways as well. There is a story that I was clued to the fact that it's very closely related to the Pentecost story. And when you first hear it, you might kind of be surprised, but it's in Genesis 11, and it's the story of the Tower of Babel. And that's another very well-known story. But to put it together with Pentecost might be a bit of a stretch at first. I did some research. I heard that a long time ago, for the first time a long time ago, even before I met Daniel. And I did some research this week, and now that is pretty well represented all across denominations, that they're making this connection between Genesis 11 and Acts 2. So let me share that one with you. I don't think we have it on PowerPoint. Genesis 11:11, or verse 1 starts off, "The whole world had one language and a common speech." Hi, John. Hello. "As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.' Now the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, 'If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other.' So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city." Another famous story. End of story. So this one is so well known that the word Babel has come to indicate a state of linguistic confusion, and something that, when the baby is just learning to talk, they begin with babbling, and they say it's a very meaningful stage, but it's also a very difficult to understand stage of language. And that's what the people at Babel sounded like to each other. They were saying something, but no one had any idea what was being said. So you see the connection. It's communication, it's language, it's people coming together, doing some things. Let me run through some of the similarities and differences between the two stories. Okay. In the stories we see at Babel there was one language at the beginning. On the other hand, at Pentecost they had multiple languages at the beginning. Okay, so at Babel they start off with no linguistic barrier. They're all speaking the same. They all understand each other. And at Pentecost, it's the other way around. You have people from different places, and things have changed, and they don't understand each other. Okay, next slide. The people gathered in the Babel story, they gathered to make a name for themselves. And name has to do with a reputation and power and glory and those kinds of things. On the other hand, it was different in the Pentecost story. The people gathered on Pentecost Day. They gathered in the name of the Lord. The name of the Lord was what they're interested in, not making a name for themselves. So there's another major difference. Okay, the next slide. The people in the Babel story are full of pride. This business of making a name for themselves, that has to do with pride. And a lot of people have said that pride is the basic human sin, is placing ourselves above others. On the other hand, at Pentecost, the people who gathered there were full of humility. Because they gathered in the name of Christ, it was for a cause greater than themselves and other than themselves. And so there's another major polarity between these two stories. Next slide. God scattered the people in judgment in the Babel story because them being together was leading to greater and greater evil and making things worse and worse. He had to bring about a judgment of scattering. And so the project, they left off the project, couldn't complete the project. On the other hand, there was scattering going on in the Pentecost story as well, but for a different reason. The people in Acts, they begin to scatter out from that place, not because they can't understand each other, because they do understand each other, and they want to take the gospel out into the world, to the four corners of the world. So, scattering in both stories, but one's a negative scattering, the other is a positive scattering. And then finally, at Babel, it resulted in disunity. God judges the people, disrupting their communication. So, that doesn't seem like a very happy ending, although it sounds like it's a good idea. At Pentecost, on the other hand, the results are different. They resulted in not disunity, but unity. And instead of God judging there, God is able to bless. God blesses them, enabling communication. And so you see the connection between those two stories? On the one hand, the first story, they got it wrong. People got it wrong, drastically wrong. On the other hand, in the New Testament story, in Acts chapter 2, people got around to getting it right. And so a whole different thing happened. Very good, I think. People haven't changed, basically. We still have the same possibilities for good and for less than good. We certainly do. Father Ricks of St. George Greek Orthodox Church has observed, with the advent of reinforced steel, in the last 100 years, mankind has been able to build the highest skyscrapers in history, and each country or corporation tries to outdo the previous one. And they're getting so high, it gets a little scarier and scarier to just think of getting in an elevator and going to the top of the thing. That's Tom, not Father Ricks. He goes on to say, are we really that different from the ancient people of Babel trying to make a name for ourselves? Each of us at various times, we've built a skyscraper within our heart to stand above and look down on everyone else. But you know what they say, the higher you go, the greater the fall. One of the lessons for us today is humility. If we want to acquire the Spirit of God, and the saints agree that this should be one of our main goals in life, then we must be humble. It makes all the difference in the world. So I'm glad to know that we have the story to tell about getting it right, not just getting it wrong. It's a much better story. I want to talk a little bit about fire in the story. Fire is the most dramatic detail to me that sticks out. You know, if you have a fire in church, that gets your attention, right? So we had a little, it wasn't a fire, but we had something that happened today that maybe not all of us know about, but when we began to show up here, one of the doors was broken out. One of the front doors was broken out. And we don't know who or why, but it's been theorized that it might have been someone on a skateboard, and the skateboard hit the glass at the bottom and busted it all up. So yeah, those things get your attention. If you came to church and everybody had a little flame above their head, you know, the insurance people might be pretty unhappy about that pretty quick. But I think we're beyond just a literal thing, a literal story, a literal experience. I think this fire was a visionary fire. It was a symbolic fire. And I think that what it symbolizes is something about the power of God in our lives. It's not just something that is singeing your hair, but it's God's power in our lives to do some great things for us. In the Bible, there are some positive uses for fire that are described within the pages of the Bible. Fire is sometimes the servant of people. Not always, but sometimes it's a great servant. It has cooked our food. It has kept us warm. It has given us light to see. It's been a part of the manufacturing process, and it's been used to refine metals. It can also be used to burn trash. Yeah, I've done some of that in my backyard. With the Oklahoma wind, it's hard to find a day that you can do it, though. I will tell you that. And nowadays, you couldn't light a fire out there with all the rain. But fire is more than just the hot stuff, especially in the Bible. It symbolizes a whole lot of positive things. There's some negatives as well, but very positive things. As we have the Spirit of God in our lives, we are spiritually fed, we are spiritually warmed, we are spiritually enlightened, and we are spiritually refined. And so let us rejoice to know that the Pentecost story is not just something long ago. It's something that describes the ongoing church, that we can have the benefits of that spirit fire of God. And may it burn within our hearts today as we seek to serve Jesus Christ together. And it's in His name that I say these things. Amen. Happy Pentecost.